Hello everyone, welcome to the video where we will be talking about processors. And today's goal is to really do an in-depth study of what a processor is. And today we'll talk about what is a processor, the different companies that produce processors, and how to differentiate between processor and actually choosing a processor for your computer build. So let's start off with what is a processor. I want you to recall that a CPU is a central processing unit, and CPU is also called a processor. And for a computer, its main function is to compute instruction, commands, and calculations for the computer. So to really talk about what a processor does, we have to talk about the computation flow. A computer works by manipulating electrical signals to its hardware, and the electrical signals is a series of binary instructions which are zeros and one, which are executed by the hardware. And so both the application and the operating system are created to ease the use for the user. So let's look at the computation flow. Whatever we do and see on the computer and click with their mouse and input with their keyboard is done on the user end, and where we're interacting with the applications that we use. Then the application also interacts with the operating system built into our computer so that it can translate that into binary instructions of zeros and ones to our hardware. So ultimately, almost all of the tasks are done by a computer will go through the processor at the end, where we're interacting with these applications as a user, and all these are going to be translated as 0 and 1 electrical signals to the processor, and processor decide how and what to do with those information. Therefore, a stronger processor is well recommended when completing a computer build. So let's talk about the producing companies, which are Intel and AMD at this moment. Both Intel and AMD companies are the powerhouses of the CPU manufacturing business. Choosing Intel or AMD based processor will determine the rest of your computer build, because ultimately if you choose an Intel or an AMD processor, it will determine what type of motherboard you have to get. Both companies based processors will have their own advantages and disadvantages. Therefore, when you're planning to build your computer, it is your job to review and research the best processors for your budget. So if we have to do that, we need to learn how to differentiate between processors. So there are three main metrics of a processor, which is the speed, the number of cores, and producing companies. So speed determines how many calculations a processor can calculate per second, and this is measured in a unit called hertz, which is a measure of frequency. So sometimes you might see CPU frequency or CPU clock speed. That's where we're talking about the speed of a processor. A single hertz, we can consider that a single calculation per second, and at this very moment, our processors are either calculated or measured by megahertz or gigahertz. So megahertz is a million instructions per second, whereas a gigahertz is a billion instructions per second. Then we have cores. Most processors nowadays are multi-core processor. And what that means is that a single processor will have multiple cores to handle multiple instructions at once. This practice is used to also increase the speed of a processor. So more cores, we get to do multiple instructions. So higher the clock speed, we can do more instructions per second. More cores allows us to handle multiple instructions at that second. So a little terminology, when you hear or see the word dual core, that means there are two cores within the processor. When you see quad core, you might see four cores. You will see four cores. And we're getting to the point where we might see more than four cores in our commercial processors. Let's talk about choosing a processor. Questions to consider when choosing a processor. The very first important question that you want to ask yourself is what is the minimum requirement for your favorite software? So think about that game, or think about Photoshop, think about Sony Vegas, these big softwares that you may use on your computer, and look at the minimum requirements and look at the processor requirements. If the processor you had in mind is stronger than that, it's perfect. But if it's weaker than the minimum requirements for your favorite software, you're going to have problems with your computer using this software. And the other questions that you want to ask yourself is what kind of other softwares you need to run, and consider the minimum requirements and minimum specification that you need for that software. Do you need integrated graphics? Most processors these days will come with integrated graphics, and they won't be the best graphics, but they do come with it. So you might want to consider getting the best one possible, or using the money to get a graphics card later on. Do you need to overclock? If you need to push the upper boundaries of your processor, you need to get a processor that is able to overclock. And actually, sometimes this is the most important questions from all. Can you afford it? Processors can range from $50 all the way to $500, and it's up to you in terms of what you need and for your computer. So you really need to budget well. Remember, you have to buy other pieces for your computer, so spending $500 for processors might destroy your budget right away. So today we did an in-depth study of what a processor does. We covered topics of what is a processor, the different companies that produce processors, and how to differentiate between processors and what to consider when choosing a processor. Thank you for watching, and stay classy.